Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we will discuss about how to review a fund. Now as a preparer, we will prepare the fund and give it to the reviewer, and reviewer will check if everything is processed correctly or not. So the accountability of a NAV released for a fund lies both with the preparer and reviewer. So I will take an example of a standalone fund today and will take you through each steps of review. Having said that, please note each company has different transaction ITs and different way to evaluate a fund and different process to book the transaction or to do the reconciliation. In this video, I will cover most generic way. So let's get started. When a fund accountant starts his or her day, the goal is to evaluate the NAV. As I told multiple times, let me repeat it again. The formula of the calculating the total net asset or NAV. Formula of NAV is total asset minus total liability divided by numbers of units outstanding. So the main goal is to evaluate the total net asset of the fund, total liability of the fund, and what is the capital activity happen into the fund. There is no hard and fast rule how to start the review of a fund, but there are few things we need to check first when we start a fund. So first thing we need to check if the fund is having any month end activity that need to be performed during the month end. So if you are working in a fund which have a specific month end activity, you need to prepare for that during the month end. You need to see that all the information came or not. You need to prepare it before month end itself, plan it accordingly so that even if you are having the extra activity, you will be able to deliver the fund on time. Because even if there are more activities, your SLA is not going to change, your deadline will not change. Next, you need to check if there is any income distribution which need to be processed at the beginning of the month for your fund. If there is any special instruction came for your fund in the middle of the month also, that can come. Sometime the client will be periodically keep sending special instruction if there is anything. If there is any instruction sent by the investment manager, if there is any liquidation, if there is any change in the investment manager, so all those information if you are receiving, then you need to check whether that is processed correctly or not. Then you need to see if there is any expense payment instruction came into the fund or not. So in this video, I will give you the example how I review a fund. First is reconciliation. Every time I start a new fund, I first check the reconciliation. I will check cash, stock, income and FX break. I make sure that everything is resolved. If it is not be able to resolve on a same day, I will make sure that it is commented properly. It has all the relevant backup. And if there is anything to be sent to a particular team, we will be sending that email or the query need to be sent. And also if there is any follow-up needed, that also we make sure that I am doing it. Also, sometime the reconciliation will take longer than the average time, because if there is any aged break or if there is any reconciliation which I need to discuss with my preparer, we take that time to do that, because it is important that you keep a clean fund in terms of reconciliation. As long as your reconciliation is clean, that represent that your fund is in good shape. Although I understand there are big portfolios, there are big funds which have a lot of currencies and the reconciliation is not that easy to make it completely clean, but it should be always our goal to keep the reconciliation clean, because sometime what happens, from this reconciliation only we will be able to identify if custody has posted any ADR fee or any expenses or any reclaim. If you have lot of reconciliation break, in that a $10 ADR fee posted by custody sometime get hidden, and we won't be able to even identify that there is this small break, and we miss out on that. That may be a small things, but we should not be having this kind of small breaks also into the fund. So that is the reason I really give too much of emphasis on the reconciliation, and I always say that try to make your reconciliation as much clean as possible. Second, capital activity. Once the reconciliations are done, I generally move to capital activity if it is processed correctly or not. So there are a couple of things which we need to check properly. First, if there is any instruction for a capital activity, if all the subscription and redemptions are processed correctly, and also if there is any adjustment of share which is related to the dilution levy, if that is processed correctly or not. In capital activity also, we need to make sure that the number of units outstanding in the fund is matching with the TA records. Then once I'm finished with the capital activity, I will move on to the trade. It is a very important part to check. First, I will check if there is any instruction came. So now for different company, not only I will tell about different company, in the same company I have seen that different clients will have different way of communicating about the trade instruction. Some will just ask us to go ahead and match with custody. Some will send all together in one Excel. Some will send in PDF. So it is a different way. So whenever I have worked in different fund, I make sure that whatever is the mode of communication for the trade blotter, I check all the trade blotters whether it is came correctly or not, and then I will check whether it is processed correctly or not. So we will also check the broker statement for future trades. One of the most important thing I have learned in my career that you need to always check the date when you are working in the fund accounting, be it the trade blotter, be it the price backup, be it the work paper, or even the NAV worksheet. Many a time I have seen that sometime, because we will be rushing to finalize and we always work for a deadline, so we will be always in the rush to complete or wrap up the work, it might slip out and we might give the backups of a wrong date, or maybe the printout has been taken or the printout has been saved for the altogether wrong date, but that become difficult. You need to keep all the backups also and the proper backup which is matching. So that's why even if for the trade blotter I have seen that there are some trade blotter, there are trade but it is not processed in custody, we are breaking our head, what is the reason? Later we see that the trade blotter is some old date, maybe the investment manager has sent it by mistake, that can also happen. So it is not always that if you see something you will process, first you check whether it is for your current valuation or not. So that is very important. So this is one of the important part of review. So while reviewing the trade check, please make sure that you are checking the trade date, settlement date, quantity, price, principal, broker and currency. Everything should be checked properly. There can be trade process due to the corporate action. So that also need to be validated against the corporate action backup. Now, if you're working for an equity fund, corporate action is an inevitable part. You might see lot of corporate action into your fund. Dividend is also one of the important corporate action. You need to see, if you are working for a equity fund, you need to see which are the securities which is going XT on particular valuation day. Then you need to make sure that the accrual which is there for that security in your fund, that is matching with the rate which is mentioned. So you need to see the rate, multiply it with the number of shares you hold, and then you need to check whether the accrual is correct or not. You need to also see the pay date if it is reflecting correctly or not in your system. What will happen if the pay date is not updated correctly? Will that impact the NAV if we put a wrong pay date? Please mention this into the comment section. What will be the issue if the pay date is not updated correctly for the dividend for a particular security? I want to know how much you understand from these lectures. For any other corporate action checks in terms of this, first I used to see whether it is a mandatory corporate action or it is a voluntary corporate action. If it is a voluntary corporate action, then I will check if my fund opted for this corporate action or not. If I see that my fund has not opted for this corporate action, then I need to also give a proper backup. Because when the reviewer check also, we see we get 10 funds. There is one corporate action we know. Let's say for a security XYZ, we see there are corporate action. But it is there in 3 funds, it is not there in 2 funds. So obviously that question will come. And for the audit purpose also, you need to keep all the backups ready. So if your fund has opted for the corporate action, definitely you will see that corporate action processed into your fund, you will give the backup. If that particular security have a corporate action and it is not applied to your fund, then also you need to give a backup that your fund has not opted for this corporate action. And if there is a mandatory corporate action, then I will check the terms. are reflecting correctly into the fund. I will spend hours in checking the corporate action if it is reflecting correctly, because in my experience, in case it is processed wrongly, it will impact the NAV, because there will be a price change to negate the corporate action activity. If corporate action is processed correctly, then the price drop and corporate action will negate. But if the corporate action is not processed correctly and price has dropped in that proportion, then it will have a NAV impact. The fifth point is expense. This is an important part of liability. We need to check if all the expense are accrued correctly into the fund. In case you have a variable expense, you need to check the management fee, or you need to calculate the management fee manually. So you need to make sure you're doing it. If you have a rebate which need to calculate manually, that also need to be checked, whether your preparer has processed it correctly or not. Those all things need to be checked. In case there is any payment instruction, then also you need to check if the payment is in line with the accrual, and if it is in line, you need to process the payment, adjust the accrual, check your accrual is also now fine. So all those checks need to be done. So till this time, whatever activity we have done, those are known as pre-pricing activity, and ideally these all activities should not impact your NAV. Next is your pricing. Pricing is when all the security held by the fund is getting priced. If there is a huge price movement for any particular security, then that need to be validated by the external source. Once you have validated the price and all the securities are priced correctly, and one more thing, as I remember, it's not about all the security price movement are reviewed. We need to see that all securities are priced, because there are times when one or two security are not priced due to a system glitch. So that is also an issue. You cannot have one security which is not getting priced, then your NAV will be wrong. So you need to first make sure all the security got priced and all the securities are priced correctly. Obviously, there will be a pricing team who will be doing this check, but as a fund accountant, we also need to do some of the checks. Then once all of the security are priced, we will have the market value. Then we will calculate the asset of the fund, which include the current market value, income, trades, unrealized gain and loss in the fund. Then we will calculate the liability, which is inclusive of the expenses and payable into the fund. And then we will arrive at the NAV. The valuation ends here. But as a reviewer of a fund, you need to go further steps to make sure that the NAV you are releasing is correct. So as a reviewer myself, I used to review all of these aspects which I am going to discuss now. So the first point is, as a reviewer, I need to make sure that the percentage movement of each attributes are correct from the prior valuation to current valuation. What I mean about it is, suppose there is an income. So I will make sure that whatever you have as your prior day income and your current day income, and if there is any movement, that is justified. You know which are the security is going XT for which there is this much NAV movement. So sometime if you see there is a huge movement of a period income, you can provide the number of securities. If on a certain day there are too many securities are going XT, definitely the period income is going to be high, and that is going to impact your NAV. So you should have all the list of the security which is going XD and whatever is the amount of accrual coming, so that you can justify this impact. So similarly, it will also applicable for expense. It will be also applicable for a realized gain loss. Let's say on a particular day, you have a huge realized gain and loss, which is impacting the NAV, and that is due to on a particular day, you have 400 sell trade in your fund, which is caused this realized gain and loss. So hence it is justified, but you need to have the backup of it, so that the number of the realized gain and loss which is coming with the transaction posted into the fund, you are able to justify, and that transaction also you are able to justify against the trade plotter. So this is the steps to follow so that you can justify the numbers. Again, the similar thing is also applicable for the expense. Let's say there is a huge change in the period expense. That is not possible unless there is any new expense got added into the fund, or you have done any adjustment into the fund. Otherwise, if there is any fixed expense, or if you have only fixed expense into your fund, then you should not have any change, because fixed expense is not going to change. Fixed expense will remain same on a daily basis. If you have a variable expense also, that dependent on your total net asset of the fund. So in case your total net asset is moving drastically, and for that your expense is moving drastically, which is actually showing an impact into your NAV, that you need to justify. In case you are not able to justify, that means something went wrong. It also happened, I have seen many a time, when I see individually each and every steps of the fund, it looks correct. But when I see it from a NAV perspective, that okay, each every attribute is working fine or not, then sometime I see that okay, there is something else is coming, or some duplicate entry has happened, something went wrong, which I identified this percentage movement. So it is very important every time you do this check, that whatever activities you are doing from prior valuation to current valuation, what is the percentage movement. If the percentage movement is quite high, if it is quite a bit impacting, then you check whether that is justified or not. For trade, you need to check whether your MTMs are reflecting correctly or not. If you have an unrealized and realized gain in your fund, that is reflecting correctly or not. In case you have a huge currency contract movement in your fund, or you see that huge movement in a particular currency, or this gain or loss, you need to check whether you have booked any large amount of currency contract in your fund. If so, whether it is a valid one or not, whether you got an instruction from investment manager for this or not. So those things need to be done, because in case there is a from a foreign currency, it is moved to a base currency, and there will be a huge FX impact also, which will be impacting the NAV. In case you have any special instruction, any income distribution is processed into the fund, you need to check that is processed correctly, and the NAV movement is also reflecting correctly, because if you are distributing income, your NAV should drop. If that is not dropping, then you have a problem into your fund. So those also need to be checked correctly. In case there is any corporate action, then you have to make sure that there is no NAV impact for this corporate action. That is also another thing to be checked. In case you are working in a multi-class fund, so you need to check that the class divergence is fine. In case you are working in a multi-manager fund, then you need to make sure from all the manager accounts, whatever activity is there, that is correctly moved to the top account from where the NAV is released. That reconciliation also need to be done correctly, or else your NAV will not be correct. In case you are working on a hedge fund and you have performance fee into your fund, you need to check whether the fund is eligible for the performance fee on this particular valuation date. You need to calculate the gap, you need to calculate performance fee, then calculate NAV. So all those processes you need to follow very clearly. And why I am telling again and again, I understand there are a lot of steps to review, and I also understand we have to meet a deadline as well. But to meet the deadline, we should not compromise on the review of a fund. We need to make sure that we are following each and every steps, so that we can meet the deadline as well. At the same time, we are releasing an accurate NAV. Another one more thing which I always follow when I review a fund is to check the market value of the fund. So if the market value, what are the top 5 contributor to the market movement? So there can be 5 securities which is moving the most. Now you need to check if in those 5, if there are equities. For equity, the threshold will be quite high. Equity can have a threshold of 20%, but it comes to a derivative, the threshold will be much lower. If it comes to the bond, then threshold will be much lower. So you need to make sure, just check which are the securities which is majorly impacting your market value movement. If those are equities, also get the external backup. If like let's say one equity is moving for 30%, one equity is moving for 25%, then better to get the external source backup to justify those movements, because the market value change is the main factor which is going to impact your NAV. Most of the time, what I have seen, if your market value is moving for let's say 2.5%, your NAV will also move for 2.45% or 2.51%. So the factors which is the pre-pricing activity, that will have a very minimal impact on your NAV movement. The majority of your NAV movement impact should be on your market value. So to justify that, you need to justify that the price movements are correct. So it is always advisable to check or get a price backup from the external source for the top 5 mover. So these above tasks which I mentioned now, it is not only restricted to the reviewer. As a preparer also, you can start looking at all these things and keep the relevant backups ready. This will help you to get more knowledge about the fund. I always believe if you're working on a fund, you should know all the numbers are there in your fund, and you should be able to give the justification, or you should be able to give the backup for any number anyone who is asking you. Let's say if anyone asks you, I see there is a period income for $20,000, where is the backup? You should be able to justify that I know there are these 5 securities which is going XT, for which we are getting this. Definitely you need to provide a backup also, but you should know about it. The more you have these kind of knowledge about your fund, you will be more confident about your fund. Hope this video is helpful for you. Next time when you work on your fund, I hope you will remember all these points. Thank you very much. Keep watching.